Hello and welcome to a special episode of Real Metal. I'm joined by JP. How you doing?
Hi.
And now we just saw a brand new film, Lords of Chaos. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to do a full review with a full panel later on when the movie comes out. I think it's late in February that the movie is going to actually be released. But we just saw a special screening here in Calgary at the Canadian Underground.
Off the cuff.
Off the cuff, yes.
Yeah, Calgary Underground Film Festival, and when they're off weeks, then they do these occasional special screenings. And there's a lot of buzz around this movie, so we both went down, and the place was packed, wasn't it?
Yeah, packed, full of metalheads.
A lineup out the door.
Here I am, an average teenager, you may think. But you couldn't be more wrong. I am the founder of Mayhem, the most infamous black metal band in the world.
We are Lords of Chaos.
You guys suck.
It's a story that I think a lot of metalheads know, and it's based on the book, The Lords of Chaos. Now, you read the book?
I have, yeah.
And I read it a long time ago. Trying to remember a lot about it, but it's a story that I think a lot of people know. So let's just get into talking about this film. How did you feel about it just right off the bat?
I gave it a sort of a C+ or B- range. It was an interesting adaptation of a true story, and I say adaptation because they took a lot of liberties with what actually happened in the events. It was a bit sensationalized and Americanized, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it was a true crime story, and it was engaging and riveting, and they told this horrible story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it took me right off the bat. There's a lot of funny parts in it, and it does even say in the trailer, it's like, based on true and fake events.
Yes, yeah, based on truth and lies. Yeah. So right at the beginning, they absolved themselves of responsibility of being really pure to the story, because they said, this is our interpretation of things that happened almost 30 years ago now. So,
and I mean, there's been a lot of dispute about the book itself, whether the stories that are told in the book are true. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are based on interviews and stuff too. I guess the only people that know what really happened were the people that were there, and
they're not talking.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that struck me when the movie first started, there's a lot of funny parts in it. Mm-hmm. Like, it's
more comedy than I expected.
Yeah, I think it's kind of needed with the brutal things that happen later on in the film. It was nice. I heard it explained as you hear a lot of films talked about as a roller coaster ride. Mm-hmm. I think this one really was emotionally. I was sitting there next to my girlfriend when we were watching, and she doesn't know the story at all, and she's laughing at certain parts, and I'm not laughing right away because I know how this story ends.
Yeah,
and it's brutal. It's but I think I think I enjoyed the film a bit more than you did. We talked about it right after we watched it. We went out and had a beer and tried to unpack what happened. It was the ending that really shook me, but we'll get to that. And like, if you don't, we're gonna spoil the film, I guess, but it's a true story and you can read about it right now, so don't feel too bad doing that. But if you don't want the film spoiled for you, watch this review after you watch it. But it starts off early on in Norway with Euronymous, and it's basically mostly based around Mayhem and Euronymous. I think is so it starts off with Euronymous and putting together what is essentially true Norwegian black metal.
Where did it start? The evolution of it from the mid '80s, because a lot of people forget Mayhem was started back as early as '86, '87. So they were really pioneers, and then this legend grew all across Scandinavia.
Yeah, and they definitely cultivated that legend too.
They did. Yeah.
That is sort of addressed in the film as well. Like, even like little things, he starts doing this tremolo picking, which is really synonymous with black metal, and you see him sort of invent that while they're playing, and you hear him say, like, Euronymous started this new way of playing guitar, and it's so dark and brutal. Yeah. And then we're introduced to Dead, which is their singer. And the story about Dead is, if you don't know, he was the singer of Mayhem for a brief period of time, really, in their history. Not much. And you've probably seen the picture on the bootleg, I can't remember the name of the
Dawn of the Black Hearts.
Dawn of the Black Hearts, which is, he killed himself. And there was pictures taken. Those pictures were stolen and used on, that's a bootleg, as far as I know, even though it's a lot of people included in their actual discography. But he slit his wrists, slit his throat, and then shot himself in the head. That all happens in the film.
Graphically.
Yes, very graphically.
Very graphically.
We
They
talked
didn't shy away from the violence.
No, we talked about how it was funny. There's lots of really funny parts and lots of funny things about being in a band, but then a scene like this happens, and it's so graphic and so brutal, it just kind of stops the film dead as it's kind of moving.
Yeah.
And as that happened, Euronymous, they only have one key to their house, which is, as far as I know, it's a true story. There's a band living in the house, there's one key. He's locked himself in the house, so Euronymous has to climb up, and the only window he can get in through is Dead's window, and that's when he sees the body. And then he stages it and takes a picture with a disposable camera.
And then he can use it to sort of further the image of the band as being the most evil thing in the world. And he was, as legend goes, he was saying that our singer was so disgusted by current music that he just couldn't stand it and took his own life and built up these stories around it, when in reality he was probably very depressed.
Well, they even say that in the film. He was a very depressed person.
Yeah.
And there's stories about him taking parts of his skull and giving it to the other members of Mayhem, which they sort of address in the film as well. So yeah, it's an intense thing.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, the movie sort of moves on. We get introduced to Varg Vikernes, who was a big player in
the early days.
The early days of the black metal scene. Look up his story. It's you can watch videos of him on YouTube right now because he's been released from prison. And but one of my favorite things about the whole fucking movie was there's a scene where Varg is. I don't know. We'll wait till we get to that. We'll explain a bit more about it before we get to the, because it's really funny. It's one of my favorite parts. But Varg gets introduced to the scene. Actually, he's introduced early on, and it's the thing I think a lot of metalheads have made fun of. His real name's Christian.
Yeah.
They make fun of that in the film as well, too. It's like, he comes in, I'm Varg. It's like, hold on, weren't you that kid Christian?
No, I'm evil.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And he starts making music with his band Burzum, and Euronymous has started his own label. He starts selling Burzum records, and then he eventually brings him in as the bass player of Mayhem. And that's when Varg goes and starts burning churches to be true black metal.
That's right. So there's a lot of horrible elements of this. Like I said, it's a true crime story. We have arson, we have murder, we have suicide, we have depression. If you want to even go more PC, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, guns, racism, homophobia. It's all there. It's all laid out that these small cadre of angry, just disenchanted, disenfranchised young men go off in this thing, and it ends badly for everybody. And that's one of the trailers. This is not going to end well. I think one of the trailers says that this is not going to end well.
Well, one of the things that really struck me as watching it is how young everyone was when this was happening. They were really young men.
Yeah, 17, 18.
Yeah, and like when it all was happening and when I was reading about it, I was a lot younger myself, so I didn't think about that so much. When I was watching the film, it was played by younger actors. And that's the thing that really struck me, is like, wow, they were just kids.
Yeah.
And things went horribly wrong. And we said the church burnings and stuff like that, and then Varg starts calling out Euronymous about not being true Norwegian black metal, and he says, look, I started it. And but it became this whole movement. There's also a murder that happens in Lillehammer. It was one of the guys from Emperor, yes. Faust, who kills a gay man in Lillehammer. That was also a brutal scene as well. I think it's even more brutal in the book.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's also all juxtaposition with all these really funny parts about being in a band and being black metal and taking evil pictures.
Talking about posers, and wearing corpse paint.
Yes. And like Dead burying his clothes so they can smell like the grave. These are things that actually happened. When he sent his demo tape to Mayhem, he sent a crucified mouse. Like, not the taxidermy crucified mouse, just a dead mouse that he found and he put on a cross. Sent to those guys. So there's lots of weird, funny things like that. But after all this happened, then Count Grishnak, or Varg Vikernes, gives an interview. And he's talking to the interviewer. They're sitting in his apartment. And so at this point, the media knows that the black metal scene is involved with the church burnings. They don't know about the murder in Lillehammer, and he kind of lets that slip, that the black metal scene is also
involved in doing most of this stuff.
Yeah. And the interviewer is sitting down there, and he's got this Nazi flag hanging in the background. And the interviewer says, "So it's about Odinism?" "Yes." "And Satanism?" "Yes." "And Nazism?" "Yes, it's about a lot of things." And then as the photographer, because the photographer's there to take pictures of Varg looking evil, as they leave and they're going out, they're getting into their car, the photographer, or the interviewer looks at the photographer and goes, "That guy's a fucking idiot." The entire audience just started clapping.
Stop laughing.
Yeah, it was great. That was because he's become such a fabled character in that scene, and he's pretty much worshipped by a lot of fucking people. That's the problem that I have. I like black metal, especially a lot of that earlier stuff, but I can never get past the fact that Burzum's albums were created by a fucking murderer.
And a racist.
And a racist, and a lot of other things. An arsonist, a not good guy. I don't give a fuck how good the music is. This guy sucks. And I think that's a problem that a lot of real big black metal fans have, is that they really love this guy. And I can't get, like, sometimes I can get past that art versus artist sort of thing. I like watching Woody Allen films, so I can get past that. Sometimes I can't get past it with him, maybe because he's been such a public figure, even when he was in jail doing interviews, and now he has his own YouTube channel. I think he's a disgusting human being, and it's hard to watch, and hard to listen to those albums and go like, "Oh yeah, no, that's good music." It might be, but
yeah,
fuck that guy. He really hated this film because he was the actor they picked to play him. His last name was Cohen, so he didn't like that because it's a Jewish name. So yeah, fuck him. But the music in the film was not a lot of the original music because a lot of bands wouldn't sign off. What did you think of that?
Well, I guess it's disappointing because you have a music film about a band creating a new kind of music, and you don't get to hear the music because they refused. Dark Throne, Emperor, and Mayhem, I believe, all said, "No, you can't use our music, and we're not endorsing this story." Apparently, they're involved in the early development of the script, and they said, "We don't like this. This is not how it happened. We're not doing this," and they pulled all their support. So, however, having said that, the music was fantastic because there was other metal bands brought in, and that was the music of the time. So we heard Old Accept and Dio and stuff that was popular in the 80s. That's what these kids were listening to, saying this is heavy, but we're going to do something even more extreme. And then they brought in other black metal bands to recreate the early black metal sound. That became the soundtrack part of it rather than the songs that appeared on the film. There's the distinction.
Yeah, no, and I think that worked. It didn't take me out of it too much. I know a lot of people really had a problem with that, with it not being the band's music in there, but I don't think it took me out of it too much.
No, it didn't ruin the film for me. Disappointing, but that didn't ruin it by any means. And most people probably really wouldn't know unless you're a diehard Mayhem fan.
It was directed by Jonas Åkerlund, who was the original drummer for Bathory.
One of the influential bands in that.
Yeah, on that whole scene. Especially Bathory was really influential. Now he didn't play on a lot of Bathory stuff. I think he's on one song that's actually available. But interesting fact that doing some research about this. He's been a director for a long time. Directed a lot of music videos, a lot of pop music videos.
Big stuff.
Yeah, like really big names. He's done some Metallica stuff as well too. But the first thing he ever worked on was Candlemass's Bewitched video. A classic heavy metal video. It's hilarious. Funny thing about it is Dead is in that video.
Yeah. I
didn't know that until I was doing some research on this. And I've seen the video 100 times, I'm sure. But he's in there, and it's not just, he's in there like a bunch too. And I think it has to be weird for that director to then be making the story about this man that just appeared as a background actor in his first work.
Yeah, strange.
I'd love to have the opportunity to interview him just to ask him about that and how that felt. Because I've heard interviews with him and he's never addressed that fact. And I think it's got to be strange.
Very.
Yeah. So we'll keep this short because we're going to get into a really big, long, in-depth discussion when the film actually comes out with our whole panel and stuff like that. And I'm sure there'll be lots of differing opinions on this. But it's going to be coming out early in February. Some select theatrical dates, and then it's going to later in February. It's going to be available on DVD and Blu-ray. Would you suggest people go out and see this film?
Absolutely, yeah. It's an important little slice of musical history for metal fans. I think it's a pretty reasonable interpretation of what happened, and it was entertaining. It was a scary true crime story. I cringed. I knew it was going to happen, and I still cringed at points, so it was well done.
It was the end of the movie that did it for me. It kind of shook me because, like I said, spoilers, but the movie ends with Varg killing Euronymous, and or that will close to the end. And that scene, I'd read about it a bunch of times and stuff like that, and it was brutal, and just seeing it depicted on screen shook me, because I watched a lot of horror films, lots of violence and stuff like that, but this was a thing that actually happened, and seeing that portrayed the way I'd read about it for years and stuff like that really had me shook by the end of this film. We'll get more into it in the next longer episode, but yeah, the violence was not sanitized. It was not a comedic aspect like a lot of fun horror movies. It was brutal and graphic, showed how hard it is to take a human life at close range. So yeah, I'd suggest you go and check out this film. I think it's whether you're a fan of black metal or anything, I think it's a decent film to watch. It's definitely well done. You may have some problems with how they maybe dramatize some of the things, but check it out and let us know what you think in the comments.